Good morning and welcome to everyone to this very special service, this joint service with our two UUCSs, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane and our host, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Salem, Oregon. I want to welcome and thank everybody who is with us this morning for this really special service on so many levels. One, because of our guest speaker you're going to hear more about in a few moments and hear from in a few moments, but also because there is a special bond between our two congregations that started with a dear friendship between myself and Reverend Richard Davis. And it is just, in many ways, our two congregations have experienced a lot over the same concerns and issues during this past year. And so it's so wonderful to have the opportunity to bring our two congregations together. So thank you all so much for sharing in this wonderful opportunity. And I want to especially thank my brother, my good officer, my friend, Richard Davis, for all of his support and also for inviting me and inviting us to share in this space today.
Thanks, Todd. It's so good to see you, brother. And I'd like to welcome you, Irshad, a special new friend. And by the way, I just learned that Irshad means guidance in Arabic, which I think is very apt for today. So thank you, Irshad, for the gift of your guiding presence with us here today, and for the gift of your example of moral courage that helps us overcome our fears, bringing more freedom and hope and love into our common life. Your life is a most beautiful offering. So pause for a moment, Irshad, and just feel good about yourself. You really should. Your life is a beautiful offering, and you bless us all. I'm going to say a little bit more about Irshad at the beginning of our dialogue, but now let's move on and acknowledge our need for transcendent light in our lives by lighting our chalice.
The chalice is the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Reverend Rick will light the chalice as I say these words from Dag Hammarskjöld. We hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back. As we enter this communal space of shared questions and responses, let us reflect on the 7 guiding principles that UU congregations affirm and promote. We agree that each and every person is important. All people should be treated fairly and kindly. We should accept one another and keep on learning together. Each person must be free to search for what is true and right in life. All persons should have a vote about things that concern them. We agree to work for a peaceful, fair, and free world, and to care for our planet Earth, the home we share with all living things.
Irshad, we are so thrilled and we're honored, and yeah, we're a little bit nervous too because this is live, but mostly we're really excited to have you with us. Undoubtedly, the memory of our time together is going to live in our congregational memory, both in Spokane and Salem and wherever else folks are viewing. We have people coming from around the country viewing in today, so welcome to everybody. let's cherish our being together now, trusting in the love that is shared. Irshad, we welcome you. We honor your Islamic faith and all else that you are, and we yearn to engage with you. Let us open our hearts and our minds to the wisdom that will be shared today. This is indeed a time of spiritual and political peril. We truly do need new lights that are going to lead us away from further polarization and tribalism. There's a whole lot I could say about you, Irshad, during this introduction. However, I'm pretty sure that people would rather hear you talk than hear me talk about you. So I'm going to dispense with the usual details regarding the books you've written and the honors you've received and your many adventures and activities, all the way from Uganda, where your family had to leave and move to Canada, and all the life that you've had in the United States and Great Britain and beyond. Instead, I want to refer people to your website, Irshad Manji. It's just your name, lowercase, all one word, irshadmanji.com, where you can learn about Irshad's amazing life journey that led her to found Moral Courage College. Irshad, you've cut a bold and unique path through your life and open channels for us all to explore so that we can again learn the lost art of listening and how to recognize our shared humanity beyond our surface labels. And towards that end, let's begin our time of dialogue as we explore together. Todd and I both have questions we're going to offer to get the conversation going, after which we'll take as many questions as we can as time allows. And if you don't get to ask a question, you can always read Irshad's book, Don't Label Me, an incredible conversation for divided time. It's a wonderful book. It's a wise and a deeply personal work, which I highly recommend to one and all. You can, those of you who are watching this service, you can go to the bottom of your screen and you can find a little Q&A box, and you can type in a question that we'll do our best to get to. If you would be so kind as to tell us where you're from, that will help us get some extent of the scope of our service this morning. So Todd, I'm going to let you get it started and ask Irshad a question, and then I'll have one for her too.
Thank you, Rick. And Irshad, I also want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being with us this morning. It's quite an honor.
The honor is mine as well. I'm glad that Reverend Rick learned the meaning of my name in Arabic. Irshad means guidance, but there's something else that I'd like the congregants to know this morning, and that is I actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest. And I must say, as I look out my window here in Brooklyn, New York, and it's a gray, chilly day, I feel in more than one way reconnected to my roots in the Pacific Northwest. So thank you for having me, all of you.
You're very welcome. I'm an admirer of the tremendous moral courage that you've demonstrated. And I want to hear more about what you mean by moral courage, because I know it's a really important part of your message. But first, I want to say that you have had the courage to publicly criticize your own religion in your 2004 book, The Trouble with Islam Today, and your 2011 book, Allah, Liberty, and Love, both of which have been banned in some countries. And most recently in your 2019 published book, I'll put a plug in for it too, Don't Label Me, an incredible conversation for divided times, in which you are critical of your own progressive peeps, we might say. So my first question for you is this: what have been the most challenging repercussions that you've had to endure because of the moral courage that you have shown?
It's been a long journey. As you mentioned, I began speaking truth to power within my own community, actually well before I wrote my first book. At the tender age of 14, I was booted out of my Islamic religious school, the madrasa, for asking too many questions. And of course, they were inconvenient questions. And I had to decide whether to stick with my faith and clam up and conform, or whether to ditch my faith and ask my questions out loud. I didn't realize in the moment, but those were not the only two choices. The third choice was to speak my truth and do so with an appreciation of more of my faith than what I was taught at the madrasa. And so, for example, after I was expelled, I took several years every Saturday because I was no longer welcome at my Islamic school. Every Saturday, I went to the public library and I read everything I could about belief systems, about cultures, about religions. And that is where I discovered something that sadly I would have never been taught at the madrasa, something very positive about my faith, namely that in Islam, we have our own tradition of independent thinking, of debate, dissent, and reinterpretation. And it was then that I came to realize, wow, I didn't have to make a false choice between being faithful and being questioning. I could do both and have integrity, which of course is the root word of integration. I could, in other words, have wholeness by being authentic and true, not to anybody's particular interpretation of Islam, but rather to the relationship of honesty that I had with my creator, God. So all to say that expressing this point has been the most challenging part of my journey in moral courage, namely that by being critical of something doesn't mean that you have rejected it, that you have abandoned it, that in any way you have been disloyal to it. Much as, always something that is said about America is that it is patriotic to dissent. And that is such a beautiful aspect of the idea and the experiment that is these United States. And I would say the very same about those of us who love something, whether it's an idea, a philosophy, a practice, those of us who love something so much that we want to see it become better. And we know that we will take negative consequences for expressing that point. We also know that we'll be accused of, rejecting what we are standing up for. But that is what makes it courage. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And I know you have some experience in this regard, Reverend Todd. I'd actually like you to speak a little bit more to the experience you have in this regard, because I'd like to bring it back to something that is deeply particular to, the congregations that are assembled today. Would you do me the honor of saying just a little bit more about the experience you have in exhibiting this kind of moral courage?
Yes, I'll be very brief because I could have said what you just said. I mean, I just felt, and that's one of the things I loved about Don't Label Me. And when I first heard you speak about it on National Public Radio, I was like, oh my God, somebody gets it, But there is this tremendous pain. I've devoted much of my life to my religion, Unitarian Universalism. And as of late, it's become something I don't recognize, in particularly in abandoning those very principles that you found claim to within your own Islamic tradition, the freedom of wonderment, the freedom of dissent, the respect for one another, and the ability to say, oh, I still love this religion. I still want it to be its best. I want it to be better than it has ever been before. And the result was, being immediately just treated like a pariah, banned, eventually condemned publicly, and censured and then excommunicated. So it's been a long journey. And it's caused some repercussions in our congregation here in Spokane. So the entire congregation has suffered from this ongoing year of suffering over an act of I thought moral courage to say what needed to be said. And fortunately, we've all come through it after about a year, and the congregation has been, mostly supportive, and I appreciate all the love that they've given us. And of course, Rick has suffered some himself from the powers that be, but he's had much support from his congregation. But all of us have watched the ministers we care about, and we've watched our communities brought into some distress, and we've seen, we worry about our religion in general. So there's a lot of anxiety, I think, here this morning, and much relief in hearing you speak about your experience.
You are not alone, Reverend Todd. You are not alone.
Let me jump in here, because I think my question follows up on exactly what you're talking about. And I'm going to preface my question with the actual question, Irshad, so you'll know where it's going. I would like to hear your thoughts on what's called critical race theory. This is the current leadership of the Unitarian Universalist Association largely embraces and promotes something called critical race theory. I personally find it to be a bizarre and disturbing ideology, because it labels and divides people and stigmatizes all who oppose them. So now, whenever somebody like my colleague Todd, he wrote a book, The Gadfly Papers, 3 inconvenient essays by one pesky minister. So he's looking for trouble with a title like that. But still, it was a good book. It really was a good book. And members of my congregation studied it and found nothing in there that was inappropriate or harsh or racist or sexist or homophobic or anything. And so nevertheless, when Todd did write his book, it was said to have caused harm, no proof of which was ever offered, and his punishment was swift and severe. The critical race theorists in power don't tolerate dissent, and so I think they're threatening our freedom of conscience and expression, which is, if you know much about Unitarian Universalism, that's what we're all about, freedom of conscience and expression, and that's why that's so important to me. So are you aware of critical race theory and what that's all about, and what are your thoughts about that, Irshad?
Yes, I'm more than aware of critical race theory. I've been aware of it for a good 20 years now. And for those who have not yet read Don't Label Me, I offer my thoughts about it in the book itself. Let me first say, because everything that catches on for a reason. Let me first acknowledge that something positive can come out of critical race theory. It has given language to the concept of power that is wielded throughout society. And it is an important philosophy for that reason. But if it were only a philosophy that allowed us to think critically about, any society in which human beings live, that would be wonderful. The problem is that critical race theory has ceased to be a philosophy and has instead become a dogma, an organized religion that verges on aspects of fundamentalism. And what of I speak when I talk about fundamentalism, because my own, efforts to speak truth to power within Islam have been met with fundamentalist responses, as have my issues with the way critical race theory is practiced. The reason I find it to be dangerous in its dogmatic form is that critical race theory does not expect people to develop trust before entering into hard discussions about race or other aspects of identity. It, in fact, doesn't believe that trust is important. And the reason it dismisses trust, this dogma called critical race theory, is that it sees every interaction in society through a binary lens. Either you have power or you don't. And worse than treating power as if it's static rather than situational, it will deem Rick, you as a white man, or Todd, you as a white man, to be an oppressor, and me as a queer woman of color who is also Muslim to be oppressed. Even if I do not feel oppressed, even if I do not consider myself oppressed, it turns out that ironically, my voice as an individual does not matter in critical race theory because it's my labels that define who I am. And similarly with you, Todd, you could be the kindest, most generous, most compassionate and open-minded individual, as can you, Rick, but that does not matter because you are white and you are male and you are straight. And that means you occupy the top echelon of power in this society. Therefore, it doesn't matter if you have a relationship with me and that, a relationship that allows me to trust you. The bottom line to critical race theory is that I should not trust you because as an ultra powerful white straight man, you will invariably oppress me. This is absurd, and more than absurd, it is insulting. It is insulting to you because how you choose to live your life as a compassionate individual is utterly dismissed. Your choices, your intentions, and even the impact that you have on me as an individual, somebody who has welcomed me to this conversation, made space for me, and my voice is utterly neglected, simply again because of the categories that you are put into. And it's insulting to me because all of my hard work, all of the choices that I've made in my life to get me to the point of being something of a thought leader is amounts to nothing, amounts to naught, because of the categories that I have been placed into. So that if I say to other people of color or other women or other queer people, but I'm not oppressed, and here is why, I must either be a self-hater or I've got, remember the 60s, false consciousness. And this is a dead end as far as developing relationships with one another. It is an absolute dead end. How, I wonder, how under this kind of a dogma can the divisions in our society be repaired if every effort made by somebody who is deemed powerful to be open, to listen, to even compromise is considered either, racist, sexist, or some kind of phobic, because now you're reminding me of my lack of power since you have the power to compromise, or is considered, in bad faith. Again, because there is no way that I can be an equal in your world, Todd, or in your world, Rick, because I'm not lording power over you. There is no road to redemption under critical race theory. You atone, but there is no redemption. You speak truth to power, but there is no solution. It is a non-starter for a functioning society. And I speak as somebody who is fully aware that I will again be labeled for having the views that I do. But the irony of all of this is that if my voice as a queer woman of color who happens to be Muslim, if my voice truly was valued under critical race theory, my viewpoint would be taken into consideration as a legitimate, authentic, and honest one. Disagree or agree, it would be seen as coming from a place of honesty, of authenticity, of individuality, rather than a place of false consciousness or self-hatred. And so at the end of the day, critical race theory does not do even what it purports to do, which is represent people in categories that I'm placed in.
Thank you, Irshad. Todd, are you ready with a question? I'm looking to find the question queue and I'm not able to access it, so I'm sorry. So we'll keep bouncing questions back and forth until I figure that part out. But maybe you could follow up with some questions to keep the dialogue going as I figure out how to get to my questions here.
Can I just interject, Rick, to say that I do see I see at least one question. I see another comment as well. But could I read the question that I'm seeing?
Sure, go ahead.
From a congregant? I think it's a question. Let's see. What is the responsibility of a listener to let someone speaking to them know that they are resonating with the speaker's emotional experience? Please be aware that I'm not talking about agreeing with any concept expressed, but only tuning in emotionally. I think that's a beautiful question. And, in Don't Label Me, I make the point that what you're really talking about in asking this question is, what is respect? Most people today fling the word respect around as if it naturally means to be agreed with. That is not respect. Respect comes from the Latin, follow me here, respectate. I'm pointing to my glasses. Respectate. Look again. In other words, if you are to respect somebody, you've got to move beyond first impressions and dig deeper. Give them the time. Ask questions rather than settle for your assumptions about them. Then listen to understand, not to win any particular argument that may come about. And ask more questions based on what you've just heard from them, not based on any preconceived agenda that you may be harboring as you entered into the conversation. This may sound a little bit abstract, but let's bring it back to your predicament, Todd. Again, I don't claim or even presume to know everything that there is to know about what you've experienced. But if you were shown respect, then the people who are made uncomfortable by your questions about how your religion or philosophy or faith is being practiced today, instead of labeling you as a sellout or as a traitor or in some way evil or heretical, they would have asked you sincere questions. Tell us more. Why do you believe what you believe? Where are you coming from? What are some of the experiences that you've had that help inform the conclusion that you've reached so far? Were you asked those kinds of questions, Todd, in a sincere way, not a gotcha?
Never asked sincerely or insincerely. It was very much, what you did was wrong. Now you need to come to the altar and have us restore you to covenant.
Right. That is the essence of disrespect. Nobody looked again. They labeled you from the get-go. And that first impression, that assumption about you, is what carried them the rest of the way. So to the person who asked the question, what is our responsibility to let the speaker know that, that we are resonating with them emotionally? Ask sincere questions, not gotcha questions. Listen to understand, not to win. And ask more questions based on what you've heard not on any preconceived agenda that you've come into the conversation with. And by the way, when you do those things, I guarantee you, because of the way we are wired as human beings, the person whom you asking these questions of will feel morally obliged to reciprocate the respect to you that you have gone first in giving to them. This is the beauty of the moral courage approach to diversity, that it's two-way, not just one way. And it literally brings out the best of what we are made of as human beings. And the second beautiful thing about the moral courage approach to diversity is that it does not reduce diversity and therefore people to external categories like race, gender, sexual identity, religion, ability, disability. All of that is important, make no mistake. But the moral courage approach to diversity expands the definition of diversity to include diverse viewpoints and is therefore much more inclusive than the critical race theory approach to diversity.
I'd like to follow up with that with a question. First of all, in regard to both of your past two responses, I want to say that I do see you, you know, there are many wonderful qualities of identity that are not meaningless, but I certainly see through those to all that you have done and worked hard to accomplish as an individual, regardless of some of those qualities in your life. And that's the gift you bring, and that's the presence that you have here today. And that's what I appreciate. So first of all, I see you and I respect you.
Right back at you, my friend.
Thank you. My question would be, you know, it's so easy for us to want to become cloistered in our world today for so many reasons. And in that, I think there's a tendency to want to withdraw from the broader concern, not only in the Unitarian Universalist Association, our national organization. We want to cloister inside our churches and say, well, let's just be who we are and worry about what we need to worry about. But I believe this is such a widespread phenomenon that threatens the best that Western culture has had to offer itself throughout the world. And I wonder if you would comment on what you feel about the magnitude of this situation, how widespread it is, what its impact might be if we're not able to turn things around.
Yeah, and I'll just tweak your question a little bit, Todd, by saying it's not whether we're able to, it's whether we're willing to. And I know that's what you meant, but I think it's important to remember, all of us, that we have agency. We are not the dupes of some system that operates in splendid isolation of our choices. We are the system, all of us. And the choices we make speak for the system itself. So with that said, what is at stake here is the very concept of humanity. You're right that the best of what the Western tradition has had to offer is on the chopping block right now. Ideas of reason and rationality and the scientific method, by which I mean questioning and questioning some more. Something in this morning's incantation reminded me of that, where, you know, we heard Barbara mention, you know, wherever we do find truth, cast doubt on that truth, simply because we as human beings are imperfect. And any truth we find cannot itself be perfect because it is interpreted by us. And we are fallible creatures. So it's important to remember that even when I believe I am right, it's important to remember that that doesn't mean I have a monopoly on truth. And when I believe you are wrong, it doesn't mean that you are evil for having your point of view. And moreover, my rightness is not the totality of who I am, just as your wrongness is not the totality of who you are. And we always forget it in the heat of the moment. And this is why I want to say one other thing about why humanity, the very concept of humanity, is at stake. You know, we human beings, we think first and foremost with our emotions. And from a biological perspective, the easiest emotion to have is fear. When we feel threatened, when the leadership of your church, Todd, feels threatened by something that you have said, the easiest and frankly laziest thing to do is to slap down what they are threatened by. That way they won't have to deal with it. They won't have to think about it. They won't have to face their fears. But this again it's a lack of courage not to face our fears. What is so rich about being human is that we do have the capacity to exercise, I'm going to use an important word here, discipline. Exercise discipline to tame our ego, the source of fear. We can tame our ego, not eliminate it altogether, but tame it so that we override that fear-filled part of our brain to tap into the more evolved part of our brain, which allows emotion and reason to coexist rather than reason bulldozing emotion. But it takes discipline. And can I tell you all something? I'm going to confide something to all of you. I don't say this very often to people because it sounds weird, but I think that you will understand the spirit from which I'm speaking. I struggle every day with optimism and hope, and whether I can have either one of those things, because I am not convinced that in this part of the world, we have the discipline to make the choices that will turn our society around and will heal us. We berate in the name of healing. We exclude people who think like you, Todd, in the name of inclusion. That is a profound lack of humility. And humility, it turns out, takes discipline to speak truth, not to the powers out there, but to the power that is our ego. Because if we're not aware of how powerful the ego is, it turns out to be pervasive and pernicious. And that is the biggest power to which those of us who fancy ourselves enlightened now need to speak truth.
Irshad, I think you might be able to see the questions and I can't. I'm not
Right.
sure why the universe has excluded me from this. However, I'll accept that. I do, if in answering your questions, I really did appreciate the parts of your book where you're advising us to tame the ego brain, because it needs taming, and we do have to have discipline. And you know, I love this country, and yet I have a lover's quarrel with it, as I think all of us who really do love it. And I'm worried about our ability to be disciplined, to have enough discourse, honest discourse, where we can find common ground. So just to amplify your point, if you see a question that
Yes,
jumps
I
up
do.
at you, why don't you go for it?
Wonderful. Okay. Robert Muir asks, how do you find empathy for someone who seems to fill you with disgust or fear, or listen to when they shower you with insults, threats, or accusations? You know, Robert, you may be, your expectations of yourself may be too high. Meaning, maybe it's not empathy that you need to try to find, but rather, maybe the empathy is a result of doing something for yourself, which is not putting the burden of being right on yourself. Lift that burden off your shoulders for just a couple of minutes and hear where this other person is coming from. And remember, ask questions. Don't make statements. Ask sincere questions, not gotcha questions, not questions like, oh, so what you're really saying is, or, oh yeah, no, I've heard that before. You're going there, aren't you? Those are not sincere questions. Ask sincere questions. Listen to understand, not to win. Remember, every discussion doesn't have to be a debate, and every debate doesn't have to be a game that you win. That's your choice to make it that way. And finally, ask more questions and watch what happens. They may insult you, they may disgust you, they may not be interested in having a dialogue in good faith. I grant that. That's a very real possibility. But here's what you need to remember. In taking some time to hear where your other is coming from, the very worst that can happen is that you've now gotten information from them about what they value. And over time, you can then reframe your own points in a way that somebody like that may finally be able to hear, because in the way you express your points, you will be tapping into their values. I'm not saying that you will, from here on in, win every argument. Again, that's not the point. What I'm saying is that the very worst thing that can happen, assuming they're unarmed when they come to the conversation, is that you will wind up being a better communicator of your own point of view than you were before that conversation. And that's a pretty fine skill to have. But there might be more that you benefit from too. You might actually grow from that conversation in terms of your own moral imagination. And who knows? They too, in their off-script moments, may think to themselves, I'll never admit this to that guy, but damn, he got me thinking. In case you think that is ridiculous, a ridiculous amount of idealism, I can only tell you that when I took my own advice back in the day, as I was traveling the world fighting for Muslim reform, the reform of us Muslims, I can't tell you how many times I heard from somebody 2-3 years later, somebody I may not even remember, who said, I used to hate your guts, but I couldn't shake the interaction that we had. And today, I just want to tell you, I see where you're coming from. If they had not told me that, I would have never known that they've changed. So understand that you might not get results immediately. And remember, we are in a society that worships instant gratification, which is why that issue of discipline is such an important one. You may not see results immediately. You might not see results ever. But don't for a moment assume that because you've taken the time to engage, that you've wasted your breath. You haven't. And I'll finish up by saying this much more. When you've stopped growing, put out your hand and thank your other for their time. They didn't have to give it to you. They did. And that in itself is a show of some respect to you. I'm Rick, Todd, feel free to jump in. And if you do, I'll continue reading what we've got.
Yeah, I think I can see the questions too, but why, we'll just cut out the middleman and choose some that you'd like to answer.
Okay, let me just see here. The questions, are about a paragraph each, so I'm going to read them on a whim. I don't know if they're ones I want to answer, but I'll now, assign these questions to me. Within our UU Church in Austin, Texas, we have heard from clergy and lay leadership that not all questions are morally neutral, and morally unneutral questions will be disregarded and considered as breaches of the church's covenant. Please speak to that stance from CRT folks.
Critical race theory. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So you're right. Yes. Critical race theory. You're saying that for other congregants. It is profoundly misguided, this approach. If you have to walk on eggshells to ask your question, first of all, they will not be sincere questions. Secondly, if you are made to believe that certain questions are off limits, how do we get to solutions? As I learned during my Islamic reform years, people have to be given the space to ask the questions that are burning inside of them, because otherwise they will suspect, as they should, that being told you have to think thrice before you ask a question means that somebody somewhere has something to hide. That doesn't build trust, and it doesn't build bridges. It builds walls. How very, if I can put it, Trumpian. And besides, what may be morally acceptable to you, and yet is somehow morally non-neutral to somebody else, why does that other person get to decide for you what is permissible and what is not? Isn't that a misuse of power? If people in this church truly believe that we have to come to the truths that we embrace on our own, if those truths cannot be dictated, if they have to be discovered for ourselves, as my belief in Islam was discovered by me, then how is it faithful to the creed of the UU Church to decide for others what is acceptable and what is not? I want you to ask those questions. And I want you to insist that those are fair questions to ask. And that if all you receive in response is defensiveness or outright censorship, you might want to reach out to Todd to discuss how to forge a new path within the UU Church. Because it seems to me then that you are being true to the creed. And it may be incumbent upon you as a believer to express your faith in ways that you know are oppressing, in ways that will lift the oppression off the voices of others in your church. Okay, let me see here. Irshad, please share examples of persons you've interacted with who appeared to be impossible to dialogue with, Trumpers or waivers of the Confederate flag, or I might say, hardcore believers of critical race theory. Let's also include them in those who seem impossible to dialogue with, who have actually listened and changed. Well, again, let me just gently take issue with the premise of your question, which is that people have to change if they're going to be worth engaging with. No, they don't have to change, just as you don't have to change your convictions. And remember, you are as crazy to them as they are to you. Just remember that. And yet you're not going to change, are you? You're not. You believe what you believe. So why should you expect them to change? They might change as a result of your engagement, but by the way, so might you. Maybe that's one of the other reasons that dogmatists of any kind don't want to engage with the other, because their faith is so fragile that it will snap under the spotlight of scrutiny, which means it's not faith at all. It's profound distrust. Hence my taking issue with the premise of your question. They might not change, but I will tell you that if you do not engage, you might be leaving social change on the table. Let me tell you a quick story. You brought up the Confederate flag. One of my own students, her name is Genesis. She lives in the South. She is an ardent and vocal opponent of the Confederate flag. She came across a post on her own feed, or not a post, I should say, a comment in her own feed, in her own social media feed, by somebody whom she remembered from kindergarten, so 25 years ago. They were never really friends, but she remembered him from kindergarten. And he said in this feed, I support the Confederate flag. Now, his name is Lewis, by the way. Genesis could have labeled him evil, racist. She could have called him out. You know what she did instead? She called him in. She invited him to her backyard to sit over lemonade and talk about the Confederate flag. And her very first question to him was a question that tapped into his emotions. How does that flag make you feel, Lewis? That was a no-brainer of a question. He didn't have to think about it. It asked him how he felt. He said, it makes me feel at home. And because she asked him such a generous question, he felt morally obligated to reciprocate. He asked her, how does it make you feel? And she said, it makes me feel terrorized. And the conversation got underway in earnest. And what Lewis realized in the course of that discussion, not a debate, remember, discussion, what he realized is that he cared more about Genesis than he did about the flag. How did that happen? Why did that happen? I asked him after the conversation. He said, Irshad, I have never encountered by anybody from Genesis's camp, the anti-flag camp, I have never encountered the kind of respect that she gave me by engaging with me and wanting to know where I was coming from. And by the way, he didn't even know that respect meant to go beyond first impressions and look again. He had no idea. He happened to use the word respect in the right way. His emotional defenses were brought down, and he could finally hear where she was coming from. And it turns out, he said at the end of that discussion, I support you. And you know what else he did? Months afterwards, so no instant gratification here, months afterwards, he took the Confederate flag down from his own backyard, and he folded it up neatly, and he put it in a box called Things of the Past. Nobody forced him. Nobody lectured him. Nobody finger wagged. He did it of his own volition because he was respected. Again, not every conversation will go that swimmingly, but you never know what change you are leaving on the table if you walk away prematurely. And that's a choice that you make. That's something you control. If you choose not to engage, don't blame racism. Don't blame phobias. Take responsibility. All right, let's
You
see.
do all the work, Irshad. You're having to find the next question. So I'll just let you read some questions and just thank you for the comments that you're making so far.
Sure.
Are there some good ones that are jumping up at you?
Well, Dorothy asks, do you have any advice on how to address people who are confident that they are correct and only want to enter conversations to win and influence the other person to change their mind? I've gotten nowhere with this. Okay, so Dorothy, I'm going to say something that may drive you nuts, okay? But it's because, again, our instinct to win as human beings is this insidious. When you say, I've gotten nowhere with this, what do you mean? Where do you want to go? What is the goal that you have when entering into a conversation with someone who only wants to win? If your goal is to teach yourself where they are coming from, then guess what? You will have achieved your goal simply by engaging and asking questions, not making statements, asking questions. But if in your heart of hearts, Dorothy, and I need you to be brutally honest with yourself about this, if in your heart of hearts, you say you've gotten nowhere because your goal is to change their mind, is to win the debate, then of course you've gotten nowhere. Because that goal is a non-starter. Let me prove it to you. Did the person whom you were engaging with, did they change your mind? They didn't, did they? Of course not. Because the way they've communicated defensively, with smugness, with, moral superiority, turns you off. It makes you not want to listen to that person because they think they've got it all figured out. There's no humility there. So why would you reward them with the willingness to change your mind? And just as they've gotten nowhere with you, you will get nowhere with them for the exact same reason. So if by getting nowhere, you mean I didn't change them, hello? Now you know why. Because you did exactly the same thing that they're doing. But what if you don't do the same thing? What if you just enter the conversation wanting genuinely to know why they believe what they believe? What are the experiences in their life that have informed where they are now? And if you had had those experiences, is it possible that you would have the same beliefs? Ask them that. I know it's a softball question. Guess what? It should be a softball because your point here is not to debate. It is to understand and get more information out of them so that you, on your own time, on your own terms, can figure out how to express your point of view in a way that speaks to their values. It's up to you, Dorothy. It's up to you how this goes. Next question. I'm just taking the questions as they come, and the very top one is what I will address.
Okay, sounds good. They're good ones, so I'm happy.
To show respect to people we may disagree with, what personal characteristics, particularly feelings about ourselves, can we work on? I think I have addressed that question, but as a sort of a recap or a refresher, work on how secure you are in your own beliefs, if you are secure, if you have, dare I say it, faith, then you can have trust. Faith is strong. Faith is sturdy. Faith never has to be threatened by skepticism. Faith can handle skepticism and can even evolve because of skepticism. It's dogma that is brittle. So ask yourself first, do I have faith in what I believe? Or do I have dogma? Second, ask yourself another brutally honest question. Why am I in the fight for, call it what you will, in the fight for anti-racism, or in the fight for, equality or fairness? Define it as you will, but why am I in this fight? Is it because you want to solve or help solve the problems that are, that are part and parcel of this fight? Or is it because, and here is where I'm asking you to be very honest with yourselves, is it because you get status from being part of that fight? You have defined part of your identity based on the fight? In other words, are you really in it to solve a problem? Or are you in it to prolong the problem? I know it sounds absurd, but the easiest way to build identity is to be against something rather than for something. And when we are against something and our identity is wrapped up in being against it, often we will engage in behaviors, destructive behaviors, that keep the fight going. Because if the problem really was solved, who would we be then? Who would my community be then? And what kind of status would I have if I can't signal my virtue to the people whose esteem I crave? This is why reckoning with the ego is everything. And just remember, humility is not the same thing as humiliation. Nobody, least of all me, is asking you to humiliate yourself at the feet of the so-called enemy or the adversary. No. When you go first in the listening department, you actually claim power. You have and you exercise the power to set the tone and even the culture of the conversation. You are saying, this is how I expect to be treated. The way I'm treating you is how I expect to be treated. You define the culture of the conversation, and in that sense, you are in the driver's seat. That is the counterintuitive power of going first as a listener. And isn't it interesting, by the way, that when we talk about leadership, we all know that a skill of leadership is public speaking. How come we never ever hear about something we might call public listening? How come that is not a phrase that has been coined as part of the leadership toolkit? Maybe it should be. Can you speak to how we do this type of courageous work with individuals while still recognizing the reality of population-based power? So I think, Susan, if I'm not mistaken, you were asking what I believe is a very important question. Is developing relationships with individuals instrumental or merely incidental to the work of dismantling systemic discrimination? Two things I want to say about this. One is that systems, structures, institutions do not exist in the absence of we who inhabit those systems, structures, and institutions. In other words, systems don't speak for themselves. Systems are not sentient beings that speak in their own voice. It is we who inhabit those systems who speak on behalf of those systems. Just as I learned, Islam doesn't speak for itself. Its practitioners speak on its behalf. And so Islam, or the UU Church, or capitalism, or feminism, or anti-racism is always, at any given time, whatever is done in the name of those ideas and philosophies and systems. So if we make better choices, the systems by definition also change because it is we who animate those systems. In our absence, they don't exist. We created them, we can recreate them. That's number one. This is why relationships matter so much. They transform systems. And for what it's worth, Christians often say transformation happens in relationship. Without relationship, there is no reason to trust. If you want transformation, it'll happen after you have built a relationship with those who need, in your view, to be transformed. And don't be surprised if you're transformed along the way too. That's number one. Number two, let me give you a concrete example of how I think so-called systemic change backfired because of a lack of relationships. Everybody can agree today that desegregating America's public schools was the right thing to do, in principle. The question is, how was it done? What happened was that well-resourced white schools were now, having to accept Black children. And what that meant was badly resourced Black schools were shuttered. The vast majority of them in this country, all Black schools, were shut down. And you know what that means? That means that professionals, well-credentialed Black teachers lost their jobs. To this day, America has not made up the deficit in Black teachers that was created because white schools got Black students and not also the other way around. So the question becomes, how could policymakers have not realized that Black teachers would be at a severe disadvantage? White teachers got to keep their jobs. Black teachers did not. How could we not have seen that coming? I'll tell you how. Because in identity politics, people are no longer people. They are, and I'm going to use a word that you used in your own question, Susan, they are populations. They are abstractions. Therefore, we policymakers didn't need to have relationships with other Black people, least of all Black teachers, because we already know that they're Black. But by not having those relationships, we didn't realize that they needed to put food on the table too. They had families too. They had credentials and professionalism too. They needed the dignity of a job too. In the absence of those relationships, all people become are abstractions, otherwise known as populations. This is why those interpersonal relationships matter. Because then the choices that we make, not just in the policies we create, but also in the way they are enacted and enforced, we can know through these relationships that we are meeting real human needs and not the needs of people who operate on theories. I hope that makes sense. I am well aware, says Tom, of the abuse both Reverend Todd and Reverend Rick have suffered at the hands of UUA and UUMA. My question to both ministers, thank you, Tom, you're giving me a break. My question to both ministers is whether they risk neglecting the needs and concerns of their congregations by taking on the larger issue of the current misguided path of UUA and UUMA.
I'll go first, Todd, because I think I can partly address that. First of all, I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister in fellowship with a larger association. And it's actually my love for the congregation that's really, and my love for Todd too, that really spurred me into action when I saw something being taken away. So if I see that the freedom of conscience, the freedom to be authentic, the freedom to be yourself, the freedom to enter into honest dialogue with other people is being taken away from us, I could ignore that and probably buy a little time here where it wouldn't impact us so much. But eventually, I think our religious movement is being misshapen in a way that will ill affect us all. So in a sense, I feel like I am protecting, I don't know if I want to be careful with my words here, but I am doing all I can to keep the health of our faith tradition in a good place. And I think that's an expectation of us as ministers, that we will not only serve our congregations, but serve the greater good of our faith tradition. And so parish ministry is always a balancing act, and I certainly consider attending to the needs and of the members of the congregation important as well too. But in a larger sense, I feel like I'm caring for us collectively by advocating, protecting this free faith tradition. So Todd, you want to add anything to this, or?
Yeah, well said. I think that I would answer the question both ways. I mean, I think, every ethical decision is a moral dilemma, or it's not a decision. And so something gets sacrificed and something gets left out, and both priorities are valuable. Somebody who would say, I'm not going to go there because I really care about keeping the peace in our congregation right now. It's in a place where things are good and want it to stay that way. That's an understandable thing to want to do. It's also understandable to say, wait a minute, there's something bigger going on. And this impacts our congregation too. And I think that's where the priority. So, I made my moral decision out of that dilemma. And I love Tom, Tom's a member of our congregation. And I have to say that Tom was probably the first member in our congregation to become alarmed by what was going on, probably 2.5, 3 years ago, and was also coming up with some radical ideas in response to what are we supposed to do? And I remember saying, that's a good idea, but I'm working on something that I think might have a greater impact. Little did I know just the impact it would have. But it's very important in our particular congregation. We were founded in 1887 upon the principles as encoded in our bylaws that reason and science and objectivity would be the sources of our inspiration, and that there would never be any censure for heresy. That's who we've been for 133 years. And we are the location where humanism was founded in the United States, in our church, religious humanism in particular between 1911 and 1916. This really was for me both a larger issue and a provincial issue for our congregation, because it was about who we claim to be, who we say we are, what our values are. And if we don't do something now, there's not going to be another 133 years. There's not going to be another 3 years for our religion and for our church. So in my opinion, I was doing my best to meet the needs of both of those priorities, but certainly I risked a lot, and it ended up leading to a lot of turmoil in our congregation.
Let me just jump in, Ershad, before we get back to you. Todd had an opportunity to offer this book, and he knew there was going to be brushback, and he really did display moral courage to offer this book, knowing that it was going to set off a firestorm, but that it was something that had to happen. But because I had a relationship with Todd and considered him a friend, when this happened, I felt called. I had a position that I could use. It's called a good officer, to help other clergy in distress. But I really felt called to.
Which he was fired from for supporting me. Sorry.
I felt called to support Todd, and so I found more moral courage than I thought I might have had because of his example. And so I'm really. When I saw about your book, Don't Label Me, and talk about moral courage, I was really intrigued, and I would love to hear your thoughts on how the moral courage inspires other people, and it keeps going, and I wondered if you had any thoughts about how we can keep promoting practices of moral courage. And I guess one would be to find out what's happening at Moral Courage College, but just some thoughts that you could share with us about spreading moral courage and what that is. And so.
Yeah, I think, so let me quickly define moral courage, and it's a simple but not simplistic definition. Moral courage means doing the right thing in the face of your fears. Doing the right thing in the face of your fears. Now, I know the question always becomes, well, what's the right thing, particularly in a polarized culture like ours, right? Somebody's right is somebody else's abominable. And I will get to that in just a moment. But let me first address the fears bit of the equation, doing the right thing in the face of your fears. What behavioral science repeatedly shows is that we human beings fear one thing over and above everything else, and that is being judged negatively. We fear being shamed, being blamed, being thought weak or ignorant or incorrect in any way by those whose esteem we crave. Which is why in any given situation, most of us as human beings will just go with the flow in a quietly desperate bid to belong, even when we know that going with the flow is wrong. We will do that. What we ought to be doing instead, particularly given the humanistic tradition that the UU Church apparently stands for, we ought to be proactively exposing ourselves to points of view that can challenge and thereby clarify whether going with the flow really is the right thing to do. Sometimes it is, by the way, because the issue is small enough that you know you have to build your social, cultural, and political capital for a bigger fight to come, which is where you will truly display moral courage. But sometimes you know that this issue may be small right now, but it's emblematic of something else that's going on out there. And as a result, it is not small at all. And if I do not expose myself to points of view that can challenge my complacency, then how can I possibly be counted on to stand for what is right when the rubber really hits the road? In other words, moral courage often is not merely an instance. It is a process of flexing, of exercising a muscle in you that will ensure that when the stakes are even higher, you will have the muscle, the moral courage muscle, to speak and act in the right way. I hear the bell. So I want to acknowledge that. But one other thing I want to say about, moral courage. Notice it is not merely a virtue. It's not that you're born with it or you're not born with it. It is a set of skills, and it is therefore teachable and learnable. Skills like, as I said earlier, expressing your curiosity, regardless of any fear you may have that my question might sound dumb. Knowing when to step up for the sake of honesty and when to step back for the sake of humility. Therefore, role modeling public listening as much as public speaking, and being able to determine what is the potential cost if I walk away too soon from this conversation. And can I use my skills to diffuse the debate aspect of this conversation, the antagonism of this conversation, to really make it more of a discussion, so that nobody has to feel that in order for them to lose, I must win. Or sorry, if in order for them to win, I must lose. Or in order for me to win, they must lose. These are all skills. And that is what we teach at Moral Courage College. As a matter of fact, and for what it's worth to all of you, we've just rolled out a book study based on Don't Label Me, with a deep discussion guide, a facilitator's kit, and a live webinar by me at the end of it, not unlike what I'm doing right now, but in which I am asking people to disagree with points that I've made in the book, precisely so that they feel heard and I can role model what a constructive conversation sounds like when it does involve disagreement. So that's certainly one way to, I think, Todd and Rick, to carry the message of moral courage and teach the practice of moral courage that much more in that much more of an organized way, is by doing the book study. But the other thing I'll just briefly mention is that by the end of this year, there will also be an online course for those who wish to become moral courage mentors. A course that you can take that will allow you then to teach others how to develop their moral courage muscle. And that can be done in schools, it can be done in communities. And my great hope is that it will be done in congregations like yours, where we all know people have questions about the direction, sometimes even the drift of where the church is going, but are too afraid to ask those questions, or simply don't have the language to ask those questions. And this is the kind of course that will equip those who wish to teach it to do so. All right, I think the bell meant that we had 15 minutes, and by now probably 10 minutes, right? Am I right about that?
Something. I think we end at 12 or something like that.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so we've actually got about like 5 minutes left. But Rick, Todd, I want to give you both an opportunity to say anything more that you'd like to. Not a thank you to me, that can be done easily and quickly. But again, I want to bring it back to what's happening within the church, so that this can be really concrete. Is there anything further that you want to say to the people who are assembled today and those who will be watching this recording later?
I can jump in real quick. I am continuing to advocate for what I think needs to be said in our movement, and I am glad to engage in dialogue with people and risk being wrong. In fact, when we first got into this, I thought that was going to be what would happen, is we would find out where we had blind spots, and we would learn, and we would be in a dialogue. And I was really surprised when that didn't happen. But I and a number of other people are continuing the path of moral courage. I think it's trying to do our best to share our concerns and hope to be heard. And if there needs to be a time when we need to listen, I need to keep that in mind as well too. Rod, you have any?
Yeah, I would just, since I'm not allowed to thank you right now.
I will never strip you of the permission to thank me, but I want you to know you have the opportunity to say something deeper than that, if you wish.
I want to honor what I think. I'll bring it into a theological point here, because you've given us a sort of repeated philosophy and spirit on which to move forward. But one of the things I've noticed about the Christian traditions and the Hebrew traditions and the Islamic tradition, which are all based in some common ancient traditions, is that whenever a divine messenger, an angel, came before somebody in those scriptures, that you always knew it was an angel because they started with one phrase: "Be not afraid." And I think that you have told us to be courageous, which is the same thing, and we don't need to be afraid. And so you have given us a tremendous sermon today, a tremendous sermon rooted deep in theology. And I dub you our guest angel today. So, thank you.
If only my mother was here to hear this. She would, by the way, take issue with the descriptor angel. Well, first of all, let me say how much I thoroughly enjoyed engaging with all of you and loved your questions. And I know there are more questions, and it always breaks my heart that we are limited by time. But I will say this much more. I want to issue a gentle challenge to the assembled. The fact that these two reverends have exhibited the kind of courage that they have, and remember, it's the kind of courage which puts at risk their status, their reputation, their esteem in an institution, your church, that they love so dearly. Robert F. Kennedy said, moral courage is a rarer commodity, a more rare commodity than bravery in battle or even great intelligence. And it is the one necessary quality that is needed to change a world that yields most painfully to change. The kind of courage that these two individuals have shown and continue to show is the hardest kind. There's no glory in it. No one is going to, blow a bugle for them. No one is going to write them up as heroes in the local paper. If you believe that this kind of courage, at the very least, deserves to have a response, and a respectful response. Again, not agreement, but respect. I would encourage you all to reach out to the leadership, so-called, of this church and ask that they respond with respect, and remind them that respect comes from the Latin respectate, to look again, to move beyond first impressions, to transcend labels, to engage. And my tip in how to phrase your request would be to approach it with grace. Grace. I talk more in Don't Label Me about what grace means, but just so you know that I am not expecting of you anything that I do not expect of myself and my own readers outside of you. The footnotes for Don't Label Me are deliberately put on my website and not in the book. You know why? Because I recognize that there will be disagreement with how I've interpreted certain sources. And I welcome that disagreement. And that disagreement actually has a hope in hell of changing my mind if it is communicated with grace. And that is the challenge that I give to my readers. Don't stew in silence. Reach out to me. Tell me where I've gone wrong. And communicate what you want me to know with grace. Because that is the way I'll be able to hear it. And by the way, some have. And it's then that I've updated my footnotes, crediting them with changing my interpretation of this or that source. So it's a win-win. Communicate with your leadership and remind them that courage of the kind that Rick and Todd are showing doesn't have to be agreed with, but it does deserve respect. And that, my friends, is faith in your creed and not just in mine. So I thank you for this opportunity to be part of your service.
Todd, we'll always remember this Sunday, I know. And I believe that we are running out of time. And so let's just continue on with the other parts of our service, and then we'll say one final goodbye to you, Ershad. So I believe you're up next, Barbara.
As Reverend Rick extinguishes the chalice flame, let us think on these words from Reverend Elizabeth Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Today, let us join hands and opened hearts to those seated beside us, our loved ones far and wide, to those in our two congregations, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem and the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, and to all others who have taken the time to listen. Let us visualize how our common spiritual search for truth, understanding, and love beyond belief bind us together. Please join me in saying these words. May faith in the spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love for the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, being part of this service. And I would especially like to thank Ershad for being so generous with your time and your wisdom. And I am so grateful to you for what you're doing, not only today, but the work that you're doing in our world. It's so sorely needed. So thank you, Ershad. Todd, do you have any concluding thoughts?
I would just again want to say thank you to everybody who's participated today. Ershad, you're amazing. And thank you for the gift of your presence, because it really was a gift on so many levels. And for the folks here in Spokane, the folks in Salem, but also it looked like there were a lot of UUs and others joining us from around the country. So just thanks everybody for being part of this, this tremendous community that we forged in this special 90 minutes. 90 minutes, but I think it will last, the memory of it will last a lifetime. So thanks to all of you. And Rick Davis, thank you so much, my brother, for inviting me and for being there for me in so many ways. You are definitely a man of great moral courage, and I admire you for it.
Thank you, everybody, for all the hard work that was put into making this service possible today. All our tech production people and everyone. So thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you all well. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.